Welcome back, everyone. Michael here. We are in beautiful Sofia, Bulgaria today. And since I'm here, it seemed like an optimal time to discuss why I am no longer keeping a residence in Bulgaria. It's something that a client asked me the other day. And for those who are longtime viewers, you will know that Bulgaria is a place that I lived for part of the year for about 3 years. And I live kind of primarily in UAE, in Dubai today. And therefore, I'm going to discuss a little bit about why that transition, how it affects you. Does that mean that you shouldn't come to Bulgaria? Does it mean you should go to Dubai? Does it mean you should stay in Bulgaria? Maybe you hadn't considered it before. I'm going to cover all of that and more today and give you a little bit of perspective, having lived in a bunch of places, why you might consider one place versus another. So let's dive in. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. Thank you for being here with us. And if you're not familiar with me, if it's your first time, I am Michael from Offshore Citizen. We are some of the foremost international tax experts and relocation specialists. So we help people to relocate to other countries, to optimize their tax for themselves and their business, relocate their company, set up banking in other countries, get residencies and citizenships, and all these types of internationalization things as part of what I call the Great Migration. So if you're interested in any of that, you can reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description as always, or send a message through offshorecitizen.net. All right, so let's talk about Bulgaria. Now, to give some context, I think it's worth understanding what brought me to Bulgaria in the first place. Now, I actually was interested in it from a business standpoint for a few years before I ever came. I had somebody who I was doing some other business with and collaborating with who had mentioned it to me as kind of this sort of hidden gem in terms of the opportunities that were there, mainly in terms of being able to employ people, in terms of, you know, the friendliness towards business, etc. And so he has helped lots of people to relocate to Bulgaria as well. And you know, I was interested to come and check it out. Now, it turned out that during the process of doing that, I met the woman who became my wife. She was living in Serbia. And so when I decided, well, if we're going to be together, we have to be together. And so we lived at first in Serbia and then eventually relocated to Bulgaria. And we'll continue with that story in a second. Now, the preference that my now wife had was Serbia. She prefers Belgrade to Sofia, prefers Serbia to Bulgaria. Granted, she's from Montenegro, and so there's some cultural familiarity there. But I think there's a number of people who would make that preference. There's, you know, pros and cons to each, and I've done some comparison videos on them in the past, but that was her preference. However, Sofia is, or Bulgaria more broadly, is a more business-friendly, less bureaucratic type environment than you will get in Serbia. Serbia tends not to be very business-friendly. It's not a great place to set up companies. It's quite bureaucratic. The taxes are not as good. Great place for hiring people. We have a bunch of people who work for us there. I think it's wonderful, and you know, wonderful people. But if you're looking at from an immigration standpoint, it's a little more difficult. From a tax standpoint, it's not quite as good. And it's definitely worse in terms of banking and bureaucracy. So that was a factor. Now, at the time, it was not definitive that we were going to go to Bulgaria. We knew that we wanted to be together. We knew that, therefore, we had to find some place that we could both live. At the time, she couldn't easily come to Canada, where I was from originally. So that wasn't really an option. And so, therefore, where would we go? And we considered places like Latin America, looked at places like Panama. We looked at places like Southeast Asia, Thailand. We actually lived for parts of the winters in Southeast Asia. And so that was a little bit of something. But for her, it seemed a little bit far and a little bit foreign. And I think this emphasizes to me a really, really important part of any time a person makes a decision. And I've had discussions with this with various different friends where, you know, the decision of where to reside is a very multidimensional decision. I have been in a situation very, very often where clients will ask me, you know, where should I go? And I always tell them, look, I can tell you the math, I can tell you the legalities, I can tell you all that. But there's a part of it which is just lifestyle preferences for you. And different people value different things. So right now, if you look around, I mean, there's beautiful nature. That's wonderful. You know, some people like warm weather. Some people like cooler weather. Some people like more rural. Some people like more urban. Some people like one culture versus another culture. That's totally personal, and you have to kind of decide that for you. And certainly, another part of that goes in is if you have family or a significant other, etc., you need to include their perspectives in this overall. So part of what I did was I kind of gave her a landscape of, well, what are the different places that we could choose from that would work, that we could fairly easily get residencies, that, you know, were fairly friendly for business, etc., and had her choose. And so part of the decision came into the fact that she wanted to be someplace that was fairly close to her home. She didn't want to be in Montenegro directly, but she wanted to be someplace close. It was fairly early on in the relationship, so if things went bad, it was easy for her to go back. That's perfectly fair. Obviously, there's some cultural familiarity. There's a reasonable overlap between Serbo-Croatian and Bulgarian, so you can understand some language. It's definitely not 100% overlap, but helps a little bit. And there's definitely cultural similarities if you think about things like food, etc., and kind of the way that people are, their values. There's some similarities there for sure, being kind of from similar region and some similar history. So I think that factored into it fairly heavily, leaning it in one direction versus another. Now, there's a few other things that are really excellent, and I do think today that Bulgaria remains a place that's probably underrated for a lot of different people. So let's just start with it's quite low cost. And low cost was an important thing for us because at the time we were traveling a lot. So during the first 2 years that we were in that region, we visited 33 countries in 2 years, right? So it's quite a lot of travel. If you're going to not be in a place for a good portion of the year, you're basically paying to have some place sitting empty. And do you want to do that it's really expensive, or do you want to do it somewhat reasonably? Now, you can do it a couple different ways. One, you could say, okay, well, I'm going to keep an inexpensive place in an expensive city, in which case, when you're in that place, it's probably going to be low quality of life, right? Or you can say, well, I'm going to just pay for a more expensive place in a more expensive place. You could do that. Or you could get a less expensive place, or you could get a more expensive place in a less expensive city, which happens to be pretty cheap, but still affords you reasonable quality of life. And so that was part of our decision. It was well connected by air, so there was a lot of great flight connections. Now, during COVID, that was a little bit different, but this was really useful. You could get Qatar Airways discount flights, business class to Asia for like ridiculously good prices. Qatar Q Suites is phenomenally great, and so that would be fantastic. So we enjoyed that. You're in a situation where, from a business friendliness standpoint, I mean, look, you have quite low personal taxes, quite low business taxes. It's fairly easy to set up companies and to maintain companies. Banking is reasonable. You're part of the EU, so you access the EU infrastructure in terms of payment processing, etc. If you're not looking for specialized skills, a reasonably good talent market to hire people in. The socials are not insane like they are in some other places. So there's kind of this overall ecosystem that makes it friendly. Plus, for my purposes, it had a tax treaty with Canada, which is useful when you're leaving. You're in a situation where you have fairly easy ability to immigrate. So, all of this played a role in what it was that caused us to come to Bulgaria. And some people might say, okay, well, is it that Bulgaria has gotten worse? And certainly, actually, I would say the opposite. I was in at a bank the other day, and when I first came to Bulgaria, when I first came to Bulgaria, it was fairly easy to open accounts, but it was very unlikely that people spoke English at the banks, and nothing was in English. Now, you might say that's perfectly fine, and I would agree. The reality is you're a foreigner, you're not entitled to them speaking your language. But that being said, it does create friction. I was in the bank the other day, and they actually had forms that were both in English and Bulgarian. You have usually 1 or 2 people in the banks who will speak English, and so that just makes it easier to kind of ease things up. So I think in many regards, in that sense, things have gotten better. You can see definitely improving infrastructure. You can see more of an ecosystem of different shops and things to do, etc. So a lot of that is quite positive. Now, the costs have risen to some extent. To give you some idea, when I first started living in Bulgaria, to go from the airport to downtown was about 12 levs, which is about 6 euros, right? Which is just outrageously cheap. That same thing now will cost you almost double or around double. Now, still not expensive, but expensive compared to what it was. So you've got, some of these things that have changed slightly, but I would say it's at the margins and not really super significant. The bigger thing is that when we came to Bulgaria, Bulgaria was never a forever place. And I think this way, if you were to imagine coming as an alien to the earth, and you look at the whole globe, and you say, I can live anywhere, what is the optimal place you would choose to live? That is probably where you should live. And that's not how most people design their lives, right? Most people design their lives, they live where they were born, where they work, or where they go to university, usually. Those are like the kind of 3 drivers. But I'm all for optimizing life. You only have one life. You're in a situation where you have very limited time, and so you might as well make the most of it. And as a result, go where you like it the most. And you should probably do that sooner rather than later, because, if you get there when you're 85, well, you kind of missed out on a lot of great opportunity. Now, there's a lot to be said for stepping stones, and this is, I think, an important lesson. You don't have to choose a place as a forever place right away. There are sensible times when you might say, look, I'm going to go and do something. I'm going to try a profession. I'm going to try a business. I'm going to live in a particular place, etc. And just experience it, and I can always change. And maybe it serves you for that time. There's kind of this idea of, in relationships, right, a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And so it doesn't have to be forever. A friend of mine once told me, she had lived overseas, she said, if you have a chance to move to another country, always take it, because you can always come back. And I think there's a lot of wisdom to that position. So for us, certainly in looking at the spectrum of where we would live in a perfect world, it was not Bulgaria, but Bulgaria made a lot of sense for us at the time. And sometime, around kind of the later period of COVID, that changed. It changed partially because some of the things we were doing in business changed. It changed because we were in a situation that we were not going to be traveling as much, and as a result, we wanted to be staying in some place longer. Therefore, we wanted a place that had, higher quality of life, etc. There was people who we'd interact with. I mean, to this day, the thing that I most appreciate about Bulgaria are my close friends who I made. I have wonderful people who I love dearly, and it's one of the main reasons that I come back is to just see them. Other than that, there's not that much for me. Now, we've moved to a place where we have language friction. So I've often said that you can get by in most of these places if you don't speak the language. But that being said, there's just like this little friction discomfort. So for example, most of the taxi drivers will not speak English when you're in Bulgaria. So, that's less wonderful. The array of conveniences that are available is just far surpassed by Dubai or UK or US or Canada or Australia, etc. than Bulgaria. And one of the reasons is that it's difficult to do a lot of the same online ordering in Bulgaria because it's not a part of the Schengen zone. There's kind of some issues with imports. There's some friction there. And to me, that has a meaningful decrease in the quality of life. Then you look at the quality of buildings that you're going to live in. So, the building that I live in has, just extraordinary amenities. It has a 24-hour grocery store. It has 24-hour gyms. It has, on and on and on, restaurants, etc. You just won't get that in Bulgaria. It's simply not available at any price. So, I'm in a wonderful place, but, everything that you want to add to that experience, you have to hire out individually as opposed to sort of taking advantage of the economies of scale that come from cities that are set up for convenience. Then there's the weather issue. So it's not terribly cold in Bulgaria, but this being said, I always felt while we were here like, okay, it's November, we need to be thinking about leaving and going someplace warm. And so for us, that was Asia. We'd go to Malaysia and Thailand primarily, but to some extent Bali, Singapore, etc. And I don't like it when I feel I have to go. In fact, in Dubai, I kind of dislike that the summer comes and I have sort of an inverse perspective, but at least I am somebody who prefers the warmth over the cold. People will sometimes say, well, hang on a minute, you're from Canada, what's the deal? And I'm like, yeah, I've had enough cold. I don't need another day of cold in my life. Unless I'm choosing to go to the Alps to go skiing or something like that, thank you very much. I'm quite happy not to deal with snow. So again, personal preference, right? I have clients who, they would much prefer Switzerland, or they would much prefer Ireland, or they would much prefer some of these other places. Great, that's perfectly fine for you. Each person is unique and they need to choose for themselves. That's an upgrade for us. Just the array of, if you think about the airport and the flight connections are really good out of UAE, but it's not just that, it's that you get high quality airlines. So, your general flying experience, if you can afford it, is just substantially better. Now granted, it's a little bit less convenient, and so if you want to explore, say, Europe, etc., you may not have the same easy access. Like, there's not that much within, say, a 2-hour flight from UAE, whereas in Bulgaria, you can go all over Europe in a 2-hour flight, which is really excellent. And we took advantage of that a lot, explored many countries, and it was great. So for you, you have to decide what is most important to you. I think for people who really want a low cost of living, who want to be in a situation where they can have a business-friendly environment, who want the convenience of being in Europe and connected to Europe, that's great. Who are looking for some situation where maybe they can be building and taking advantage of, hiring people locally and, building a team and things like that, I think it's really quite good. And as I said, it is, in my opinion, probably a little bit underrated by a lot of people. There's also a culture that many of our viewers are the types of people who are, more freedom-oriented, less rules, etc. I mean, these are kind of former communist countries that don't trust the government, probably rightly so. And so you get a certain culture that tends to favor, certain people are just more in that direction. And you might not get that if you're in Denmark or Netherlands or Sweden or Finland or Norway or Spain or France, something like that, right? So for those people, I think it's really good. A little difficult for foreigners who are not from the EU to relocate. Not insurmountable by any stretch, but takes a bit of time, costs a bit of money, etc. But for people who are in the EU, it's extremely easy. And so, yeah, you have to choose for yourself. But for us, we're moving more towards like, where's the forever place? And that's just a function of where I'm at in life at the moment. And Bulgaria is not it. Ideally, I have found in my life that there is no perfect place, but there's a few perfect places collectively. And so having UAE as a center point is really great for me, and then kind of spreading out between a few other places makes it really well. So anyway, I hope that helps, gives you some context. If you have questions, put them in the comments below. Share with me your thoughts on what your ideal places are, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.